it could just simply be that, you tax a system consistently for so long, and you may see some internal fluctuations you're not used to seeing. I really don't know. So all that to say is I'm not comfortable saying that is it. It could be. I don't know, but there's something going on here, and things have been pretty stirred up.
Mhm.
And I guess the important point in all of that is that we spoke last week, and because of the fact that this last week is a blur, I can't recall. I'm not going to be able to say this the way it really needs to be said for sake of really getting it across. But we spoke about um, working with experiences that are uncomfortable or unpleasant, and investigating those and breaking them down. And the timing, well, of course, it was the result. That was the result of the fact that I was already feeling bad last Friday. And
Mhm.
so, and I logged on to our conversation last week with the idea in mind that, okay, let's work with this. It's happening. It's right now. Let's work with this. And there was a certain degree of payoff in that, because even at the worst of being sick in the last week, there was a lot of it, not all of it, but there was a lot of it where I could, and a lot of this was happening on the fly rather than being able to just stop and look into it. But on the fly, something's really uncomfortable. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, there's this feeling in the body. Okay, and these are the thoughts about it.
Mhm.
And oh, okay, so it's not actually, sometimes it is, it's outright thought. You can hear the mind talking in
Yeah.
words very clearly, and it's narrating it, and taking this sensation in the body and turning it into more than it really is. Other times it's not really words, it's this sort of like the mind is talking, but it hasn't really gotten to the point, it hasn't undergone the formality of manifesting in actual words, but it's thought.
Yeah.
I mean, you can
Yeah.
recognize it as thought. It's like that's thought. It may not be words, but that is thought.
Yeah.
Somehow, without being rendered in actual language, it is describing to itself what's going on here. I can
Yeah.
see this is the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, even though I don't necessarily know exactly what is being said, I know something is being said saying, "Ooh, I don't like this. This is unpleasant. Let's try to find a way to make it go away." Okay, all right, we got to work with that. And so, it's gotten me through a particularly brutal illness without completely sinking in the quicksand.
Wow, I'm happy for that. I'm happy to hear that. That's wonderful. Of
I mean, I need to qualify it. There's still a lot of work to be done and a long way to
course.
go, but it was a really good start.
That is fantastic. Genuinely happy to hear that. The, the good thing is, when we talk about like a lot of the second fetter stuff, people kind of have the idea that, oh, so or even the fourth and fifth fetter stuff where it's like dealing with, cravings or addictions to things or things that I don't like or we get the idea that okay, so I'm gonna have to like take every single one of these and work on every single craving I have, I have to work on individually, and we get that kind of idea. Or every annoyance that I've ever had, I have to work on. But it's not. It's like one fundamental skill that when you develop that awareness of being able to just be with that discomfort that shows up, break it down into its parts, recognize it, sit with it, and then even without words, even without like potent inquiry, just kind of questioning the veracity of its power, of its truth.
Mhm.
It just makes it so that we are fundamentally more able to simply be with anything that shows up. It doesn't, you don't have to go, oh, and now I'm working with my cravings for chocolate. Now I'm working with my cravings for, caffeine or tobacco or whatever it is. It's just like it's one fundamental skill that works in every situation.
Yeah, that makes
So,
sense.
having that where you were able to do it when you were feeling sick and other stuff was going on, it bodes really well because that becomes that generalizable skill that just shows up now in any situation. And take that same thing when you have the experience of craving kratom or caffeine or anything like that. It's the same tool that you're using, slightly different application, but the same basic procedure is there.
Well, and it'll be interesting because I think a real good test of this will be once things have settled down here in this house with regards to just general day in, day out life. Because there are all sorts of other things going on that, are a result directly or indirectly of all of the other stuff that we've had going on. Once all of these other things begin to kind of settle down a bit and I've tapered off of the kratom and so on, the next thing is caffeine
Hmm.
because caffeine does create a certain degree of stress and unpleasantness. And
Yeah.
so it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to knowingly, intentionally take on a degree of suffering, no matter how subtle,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It is interesting that it still even shows up as a possibility that
How do
there
you mean?
you have to, well, that you even have to like, I suffer every time I have this coffee. The next thing I need to do is work with my cravings for that thing that always reliably gives me suffering. Like the fact that there is still a pull to it is just fascinating.
A pull to using it, you mean?
Using it, yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I,
that
I, I
the
have been, I have
reliable
been so
suffering of
perplexed. I'm sorry, we're
no,
talking
no,
over each
just that the
other.
reliable suffering of it alone isn't enough of a deterrent. That there's still, I still need to do something specific to stop flogging myself in the back every time I think about it.
Believe me, I have puzzled over that without exaggeration for years. I can remember, I guess it was starting in 2017 or 2018 when it really started to become an issue. And Susanna and Tuesday were saying, when you have caffeine, you are you're just awful, and we don't want you doing this anymore. Um, and having this intense craving for it, going towards something to go and have something that creates all of that kind of effect. And it was so much like, I mean, it paralleled in so many ways my brief career as an active alcoholic.
Yeah.
But uh, the difference in that case with the caffeine was that I had already been meditating for many years.
Mm.
And so there was, even though it's not as well trained as it is now, the ability to look at things and begin to try to analyze them and investigate them and see what's going on. Um, it was still there, even if it was a very rudimentary version of it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out what was going on when I would be in the car and I'd be heading somewhere. And it's like, well, let's stop at the QT and go get a big thing of tea, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like people say in AA meetings. I've heard people say this that I just watched myself drive to the liquor store. Well, I just watched myself drive to the QT to go in and get one of those monster cups of tea.
Yeah.
Um, and it was the most perplexing and frustrating, aggravating, and to some extent heartrending thing because there was the biggest part of me didn't want to do it, but it was
Yeah.
happening anyway, and that speaks to just exactly what you said. Yes, you're absolutely right. It is it it doesn't make any sense. You'd think that in and of itself would be enough to cause a person to pull the plug and say, okay,
Yeah.
enough's enough, we're done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like we're talking heroin here.
No, no. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
or even tobacco. Tobacco, I've heard
Yeah.
horror stories about how bad it is trying to break the tobacco habit, but
Mhm.
we are. So
And it's interesting too, because you mentioned tea as well. And I always, because I'm a long, long time tea drinker, but I don't generally ever feel anything from it. And I think this is just something that's like metabolic thing that
Hmm.
if I drink like, because I usually drink decaf coffee, but caffeinated tea, and so I don't really feel anything from the caffeinated tea. If I drank real coffee, or especially like Death Wish coffee or something that's like, hyper caffeinated, it is not pleasant. I'm not a fan. Um,
Yeah.
so, uh, so for me, there's like a really strong difference between like tea caffeine and coffee caffeine. But for you, it sounded like, or was it just that you were drinking such quantities of the tea that,
It's partly that. It's partly the big 32 or 44 ounce cup, but there's another thing. I don't know if they still do this, but for a while, when I started really drinking tea and it was coming from QT, the way that their store policy was, they made it in such a way that you fill up one of those clear plastic cups with tea and hold it to the sunlight, and it is a dark amber red. They
okay.
make it extremely thick.
Yeah, yeah, nice. That could be too.
Yeah, but that has everything to do with it because the first time I went and got a cup of tea at QT, um, I had no idea of this. I just wanted a cup of tea, and
Yeah,
I drank one of their larger cups of it and got this huge caffeine buzz.
interesting.
Which normally tea doesn't
No,
do that to
no,
me. So
no.
I understood immediately that there was something about the way they make it that it's pretty potent stuff.
Yeah,
So and therein was my descent into the inner concentric circles of caffeine.
yeah, I get that. So, but now, I mean, and I know we've talked about caffeine a lot. Um,
Mhm.
we have it's
We
been
have, yeah.
it's been a recurring theme for a while.
But I'll
But
take that over a lot of other things.
yeah, 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 absolutely. It's one of the better things I think to be addicted to if you're, struggling with that.
Hmm.
Uh, even like, okay, if you had the idea right now of that, QTT or
Hmm.
cup of coffee, what is the first association that comes up with it? What is the primary association?
In terms of what the effect of it,
No,
or
like if you just think of it, I'm curious what the initial effect is in the body.
it has something to do with the feeling that it generated. There are a number of firsts for me regarding caffeine. There are three or four significant moments in terms of really getting a pretty strong effect from it. And so that's, I think, the very first thing is this recollection of those times when it had a really strong effect and it was almost, if not entirely, positive. It felt good, a lot of energy, clear thinking, so on and
Yeah.
so forth. And so I think that is the fundamental sort of cornerstone um, conditioning in the mind with regards to it.
Yeah, and so that do you kind of feel that affect in the body when you picture the tea or picture the coffee?
Sometimes, not all the time, because something about that relationship is beginning to break down. I
Hmm.
mean, because there was a point in time where I would drink huge amounts of it through the course of a day. Now I have 1 cup of reasonable strength coffee in the morning, and often, but not always, a second cup of, whether it's coffee or energy drink or something later in the day. It almost never goes beyond that. And sometimes I don't even have the second round.
Hmm.
And it's not because of any kind of gritting of the teeth and, really trying to exert some sort of
Yeah,
will.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
it's something that just seems to have kind of evolved naturally. So
yeah.
the relationship has modified somehow.
Good.
But that
Yeah.
that that thinking that you asked about, it,
Yeah.
it, it is there in some way or another.
Yeah. Because it's useful to recognize that and then also to update with the new information. Because, maybe that's how it was the first time or even the first 10 times, but it's not how it is every time now.
Almost never.
Yeah. And so we're basically we're kind of using the wrong association for it. You know, we have positive associations of how things used to be, and it's getting overlaid onto a reality now that doesn't line up with that. And so there's
Hmm.
that constant assumption that it's going to feel like this, and then it doesn't feel like that. And so there's this constant rift between the two. So
Hmm.
instead, having that sort of conscious awareness before you get into it of, okay, I'm aware that this, either if it's an image that you're seeing of the tea, you know, back in the old days, if it's a positive body affect where you actually feel a little bit of excitement or anticipatory goodness or something like that, and recognize that that is a memory. It's about something that happened, but it's not a presaging of the future. It doesn't tell you that it is
Hmm.
going to happen if I have this. It's simply an associative memory, like, oh, I remember there was a lovely Christmas when I was 7, and doesn't mean that the next Christmas that you have is going to be the same as that. It's almost something closer to nostalgia than it is
Hmm.
um, uh, foreshadowing of this next time you have a cup of coffee or tea. So it's like what you were doing this week, where you can see what's happening in the body and see the thoughts and have that sort of awareness of it that kind of stands off from it. I don't know how to explain it, but there's like a clarity in being able to see these things for what they are and having that instant where you're like, okay, I feel and I see the associations that are there with the tea, and then realize that none of that has any bearing on this moment or on the potential cup of tea or potential cup of coffee or energy drink that you might have later on today. It's like
Hmm.
a very clear recognition in your experience that there is a nostalgic or vaguely positive a feeling in the body at the moment. There's a thought about a cup of tea that no longer exists and hasn't existed for, 10 years. And then here I'm sitting here making something out of that, making that into the reason or the explanation or the justifying the urge of why I should go now and get that thing. There's uh, it's that false connection, that false bridge that doesn't actually exist. That we assume because I remember something being good in the past, and because I have a memory of it, and because I feel positive an association with that now, I assume that that means I need to do something about it and go get that now. It's not. It's not. It's not even a recommendation that you should have it now. It's simply a memory and a current sensation that shows up in response to that memory.
um, and all of that, I absolutely agree, and I'm able to see from my own experiences with this how correct all of that is. And some
Mm,
of that, not all of it, but some of what you just described, I've seen for myself in those moments where there's this drive to have caffeine, but there's another voice that's saying quite loudly, "No, enough's enough.
yeah,
This is not serving this being well.
yeah,
Enough,
yeah,
no." And in those moments, trying to see what's going on to see if there's something that can be seen and unplugged so that it's like the old cartoons, the devil on one shoulder and little angel on the other. And I was like, how do
yeah,
we knock that one off?
yeah,
Um, so I can verify all of that for myself in my just by reflecting on my own experience with
yeah,
all of
good.
this.
And I would actually reframe or slightly twist a little bit. Um, like the way you phrased it, there's kind of the idea that there is the angel on the one shoulder who is has to in some way overpower the negative side of things. And even I would even go so far as to say that even the idea that like I have to resist the urge or enough is enough, it's coming from a standpoint of needing to like I think let's put it this way. One of the reasons why I think these things a lot of times don't work is because it's coming from trying to like use the mind to rationalize ourselves why it's not a good thing. You have something in the body, some motivation which is there, which is compelling a behavior, and we're trying to use the rational mind to say, "Oh yes, but you know, darling, when you have that, you're going to, be a right miserable ass, and you're going to, have a terrible day ahead of you." It's not doing it. It's the wrong having that logical analytical mind isn't getting to the core of the issue because it's not really about that to begin with. So
Hmm.
instead of putting yourself on one shoulder and saying, I have to be the good, strong, willful, resistant, wise one who's fighting the baser, lesser urges to have the caffeine, be in the middle. And in that uh sort of open awareness that we're talking about, that recognition that this is here, the thought arises about the tea, the sensation arises in the body. This awareness of it is completely impartial. It's not coming from the I need to get rid of this, I don't want that, bad things are coming from me. It really is that selfless, impartial viewpoint, which from that, it's okay either way, but it's the fact that when you are in that part, the more detrimental behaviors are less likely to happen because you can see that they're being driven by something which is sort of a false promise. And then it's not that you have to resist the urge, it's just that the urge falls away because the whole mechanism is broken. You're seeing it from that neutral standpoint where you just see the game as it is and you're no longer motivated to do anything about it. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do follow you, but it raises a question. And before the question, though, I wonder if that is why the drive to it, the, I guess, obsessive compulsiveness towards it has modified and has reduced some,
Mm.
now where it's one, two, maybe on the outside, three servings a day, whereas it used to be, I can remember times, in what, 20, 2007, 8, 9, where, it was two or three pots a day.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Um, and even a couple of years ago, it wasn't that excessive, but it was still more on a consistent basis than it is now. So I wonder
Mhm.
about that. But the question is, you said, hold on a minute. I wish I had made a note of that. Let me see if I can get it back. Um, you had spoken about that impartial sort of
Mhm.
awareness that isn't caught up in it,
Mhm.
and seeing that, this process from that place, and that begins to break it down. And something in that, there's something I'm not doing or not getting or is not happening. I don't know how to phrase it exactly, because there have been times where I've gone into the store and that voice shows up and, oh, well, we're here at the store. You can grab an energy drink. No, that's just really not even necessary. That there's no real genuine value in that.
Yeah.
And so something begins to try to intercede, and I will do exactly what you've described, where I'll stop. And I've done this. I've been
Yep.
standing in the aisle at the grocery store
I
in
love
front of
it.
the energy drinks, and there's a little voice in the back of the mind. People are probably wondering if you're frozen, because I'm just standing there for a
Yeah.
prolonged period of time looking, but my eyes are open. But what's happening is inside, and I'm paying attention to, okay, what are the sensations in the body? What are
Yep.
the thoughts that are coming up around that?
Love
And
it.
investigating what's going on. And there have been exceptions, but most of the time, like 8 out of 10, I wind up grabbing a can and off we go. And it, probably in every case there's been a question of, okay, what did I miss? What did I not do? Did I not stay with it long enough? Did I not look deeply enough? What's going on there that I'm looking at the sensations, I'm hearing the thoughts, I'm investigating this, but I'm still that decision is still being made.
Okay. Well, I'm curious, when you're standing there doing it, what are the persuasive what is the persuasive side of the argument? You know, you're sitting there, you're observing. What are the thoughts? What are the sensations that are making that energy drink seem like a wantable, craveable, intriguing thing?
Well, I'm glad you kind of backed that up with also adding what is the sensation,
Yeah.
because the mental voice part of it is just, oh, I'm tired, or well, it's going to be the rest. It's going to be a long rest of the day before everything is done. All these sorts of rationalizations.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know how much they really play a role in it, because what seems like more than anything else is winning that little particular tug of war is a sensation in the body. And curiously enough, the sensation in the body isn't anything having to do with positive caffeine consumption experiences in the past. It's really just sort of this contracted kind of it's been a while, so I'm having to try to recall it from memory, but it's kind of a contracted, clingy sort of, but I really want that sort of feeling.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Really, really good. And that's where, so then when you have that contracted, clingy feeling,
Hmm.
you put your attention on that and do the same activity with that.
Oh, that's where we got lost,
Because there's a
is
belief
failing to follow through into that.
that there's a belief that that really means that, but I do want it. There's something here that I do want, and I'm depriving myself if I don't get it. And that there's some, whatever that is, that's the mind might create verbiage around it. But the idea is there's something that says that that sensation really means that I want it and that I need it for some reason. And that's what you then turn your attention to because it's not. That's
Well,
just
let's
one more part of this experience, which is being immediately taken to be something that it really doesn't have in it.
Okay, so let's think about that for a second, because I want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Mm.
What you just said about the clingy sensation, and I can't remember how you put it, but what you just said was very um, it felt important,
Hmm.
um, because like I said, kind of while you were talking, I'd said that that's the thing that's not happening. Um, so let's kind of break that down.
Yeah.
Oh, real quick, just I'm going to interject here for a second because I forgot. Susanna is sick,
Okay.
and although I've asked Tuesday to help, sometimes, well, more often than not, that doesn't really.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you hear a little bell sound, I've got my phone over here with my
Okay.
notifications turned on. So if you hear a little bell sound, that means I need to go help her.
No worries.
One thing I wanted to say earlier on, so this is kind of out of sequence, but for the sake of anyone watching this at any point in time, um, going back to that whole thing about being sick,
Mhm.
um, and the thing with all of this with the caffeine too, it truly is a case of that phrase that you've used that I think most people attribute it to Ram Dass, about everything being grist for the mill. It
Yeah, yeah.
is. And in that, I want to qualify it by saying this. I can imagine hearing some people saying, well, you were sick. Why didn't you just set it aside? Why didn't you just, that's
Yeah.
maybe not an optimal time, or, all of these kind of but ifs about it. And I would
Yeah.
say, absolutely not. There is no time off for good behavior. There is no retirement. It's not like you, to borrow a phrase from Tanisara Bhikkhu, you don't get to the age of 65 and get to retire from this because suffering never stops.
Love it.
It's always keeps on coming. And so
Yeah.
there is no time off. Everything, absolutely everything, no exceptions, no exclusions,
Yep.
all gets called into service of trying to or making the move towards as much freedom from suffering as humanly possible.
Yeah.
So
100% agree. Love
yeah,
that.
just I wanted to put that out there because I could almost kind of hear voices from the near and distant future saying, "Oh, come on, you were sick." I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so.
100%. 100%.
Um, but
I
anyway, back to and now back to our regularly scheduled
yeah.
program. Um, um, the the analysis, the digging deeper, digging further into that, but I want it voice. As you started to comment on that, you're over here. I don't know what it's going to look like on the video once it winds up
Yeah.
on YouTube, but on this side it froze, so I only heard part
Oh,
of what you
oh
said.
no. Okay.
So
Yes.
let's, if you don't mind, let's kind of do that one more time.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, so when you're sitting there, either with the caffeine or really with anything else, I mean, again, it's one of those easily generalizable things that
Hmm.
if you have the habit of feeling like you want something, and then when you have the idea that I'm not going to have it, and this is why I recommend to people a lot of times, get to the point where you're like about to reach out for the thing
Oh.
and then stop and turn away and walk away and see what shows up in the body because oftentimes it is that same kind of contraction of that like self-deprivation, that little toddler that's screaming, but I want it. I want that. You're not giving to me and however you experience that, and it's probably a very old thing, a very old habit that's been showing up. So what we do, just like the idea of when you remember the first time that you had this magnificent mug of tea and it was, life upending, transformative experience, knowing that that's not going to be the case the next time, or it's very unlikely to be the case the next time, having that awareness to it, it's the same sort of awareness that we bring to that feeling of deprivation, that clinging, grasping, contracted, but I want it. There's an assumption that that means I actually want it. It's an old reaction that happens in the body when, for whatever reason, uh um the things that you seem to want gets subverted. Your anticipation is it doesn't follow through, whatever it is. You felt this sense of disappointment, you felt this sense of being let down, you felt this sense of deprivation, however it is. This
Yeah.
is the sensation in the body that's showing up right now. This sensation in the body does not actually mean that you need that caffeine, right? It doesn't mean that you need the energy drink. We can look at it or come at it from a couple different ways. One is that you can simply observe the sensation and you can observe the thoughts and you can recognize in that it is just as much a reflection of the past and as the thought of the immaculate tea that you once had and had this wonderful experience with. It's just as much of a nostalgic, even if it's a negative kind of nostalgia, uh, nostalgic reminiscence of the past and has nothing to do with this actual moment here. You can step back from it and just observe, oh, what is the experience of that clinging, childlike, but I want it really like? Do you have gripping in the chest? Is there a feeling of pulling inward? Is there a feeling of sadness? Is there are there words that are actually saying, but I want it, or whatever? Break apart the experience to see that this is not real. This is not me having a moment where I genuinely need that thing and that need is not being met and fulfilled. And recognize what is really being on display right now.
Oh. Oh, okay. Now, I don't know if this is relevant. I don't know if this
Yeah.
is over psychologizing
Yeah.
this whole thing or not. But as you're just talking, and I'm hearing you, I'm processing it all,
Yeah.
and there's a little portion of that that's kind of trying to reflect on previous experiences with this and the I want it. And one thing that kind of came up were there were a number of different instances when I was a kid, and I mean, ages 4 to 7 or so,
Yeah.
where I wanted things and I would go to my parents for them. And in a number of cases, my parents were so busy talking amongst themselves about some sort of thing that I was either not heard at all or I
Yeah.
was heard very quickly and dismissed. And
Yeah.
it seems like there's something at work here that says, okay, now I'm that adult person and I can hear me and say yes and give that to me. And it's almost like trying to make up for something that didn't go the way I wanted it to all those years ago.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
that
does
is,
that sound right?
yeah, I mean, that is actually a perfect lead into the second part of the thing that I was going to say.
Okay.
The other thing you can do, the one is just to observe, and in that observation, having the whole facade dissolve, like we've talked about. But the other side of that is that it's probably coming from, as you so deftly intuited, that it's coming from this old, some old wounds that were there that, and it's just this pattern that comes up. So the thing that you can do, because you know little Darrell is not really interested in that energy drink. It's not about that. It's about being
Right.
seen and it's about being recognized. And so you can, in that moment, take a moment to feel into and reassure it's okay. You're safe. I've got this. I've got your back. But the important thing, so you can do the reassurance, but the important thing is that it's probably pointing to a much deeper issue in your life at this point, which is that to there is a need which is not being met. There is your that caffeine isn't what you actually need right now. It's that something else is being put aside and you're not being heard. Whether
See,
it's by other people around you or whether it's by you, the important thing is it's got to be by you, right? You are not listening to something that is relevant in your own needs, and it's
no,
not caffeine.
well, boy, you talk about a perfect lead in. I mean, this is coincidental in a way that it's so spooky that it makes me think maybe it's not coincidental, whatever that means. I'm not implying any one specific thing. Um, the night before last, I woke up it was around 4 in the morning, and I could recall the dream I was having clearly at that point. I can't really now. I wish I'd made notes of the actual content of the dream. That might have been useful. But at any rate, what I could recall was as I came to consciousness, the mind was talking. There were things being said about the dream and what it represented. And so I grabbed my phone and made some notes because turning on the light to write something wasn't really an option. So what I wrote was, and I can connect this with a reasonable degree of connection to things going on here in our home currently and for a while now. But what I wrote was something about not mattering, about being steamrolled over, about people doing whatever they want without any regard for how I feel or how getting what they want affects me, not being seen, not mattering, not having value or meaning anything to others, particularly those I care for.
Yeah.
Um, and then, okay, yeah, I made some other things, but it's not connected to that. So yeah, that's what I uh, wrote down quickly.
Yep. And that's the sort of thing which makes it that even if you kick the kratom, you still have the caffeine. And if you kick the caffeine, you will have something else. It's it's being used as a tool because it's not about the actual substance. It's this promise that you are giving yourself a treat, something. You're seeing some need that's being fulfilled. Really, what you're really doing is basically numbing the experience of not feeling your needs are not being met.
That explains so much. That really does. Because I mean, my lifetime from a very, very early age has been just seemingly a constant string of using things to
Yeah.
change the feeling of emotions in the body.
Hmm.
Whether it's even as a little kid, food, ice cream, TV, whatever.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yeah, I've been the same. I completely recognize that. But it is that thing where you have to become aware that you're not craving the thing. You're it's a promise of something. It's like, okay, but I can do this one thing for myself. This is for me. But it's not because you know on the other side of that, you're going to be miserable. You're suffering. The thing itself isn't even fulfilling the promise that's there.
or even if not miserable, just a little bit uncomfortable. And I realize how that may sound to some people. So to qualify that, I refer back to Tanis Rabiku a lot because I used to listen to him a great deal.
Yeah, yeah.
He just said things in a way that made sense to me. But he was talking about suffering and how the Buddha said we don't discern suffering, and
Mm,
that's really precise language for a reason. I know you know that, but other people may not understand that. And he said the truth is that it can be very, very subtle levels of suffering, and it's
yeah,
still suffering. And he said, ironically, many times it's the things we like and enjoy that bring us suffering.
yeah.
And so, you said that, and it's a little is a lot.
Yep.
And I think if my experience holds out, as we cultivate our way down this path, we tend to become more sensitive to things that before were below the threshold of awareness. So that little bit of suffering is now a little bit of suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And also, the more we do this stuff, the more we're taking away a lot of those numbing agents and coping mechanisms that we once had. So,
Right.
we were living in largely altered states of being in a lot of those ways. It was like
Mhm.
constantly running from one distraction to another. The less distracted you are, the more we recognize them. You started last week's session by saying that, it's the discomfort of having a human body or something about that. And
Mhm.
and we are largely distracting ourselves from those discomforts all the freaking time. That is our life. That is the human trait, is to constantly weave and duck so that we don't feel and experience life as it really is. Because it isn't all that pleasant all the time. But once we get really deep into those sensations and experiences, then we start to see below that valence of positive and negative, or pleasant and unpleasant, and then life suddenly looks a lot different. And that's what I'm pointing at with this idea that the promise that something holds for you is just this mental layer. It's just a thought about what might happen, and you can reliably ascertain based on past, you know, events, it's probably unlikely to bring that positive, experience again.
Mhm.
So what is here, even in that discomfort? And so when you are standing there and you're, about to reach out for the energy drink, and you feel that little Darrell in there is like, you know, I want this, I gotta have this thing. Take the moment and try it different ways and see what works the best and what's the most helpful. But either recognizing that that is just sensation, it is just something which, again, on the surface seems unpleasant. It's like that call to do something about it. It's like the thorn in your shoe that yells, to remove me. But really, can you just feel the sensation that is that gripping in the chest, that feeling of like inward pulling, sucking, needing, that feeling? Can you just feel that and feel it as completely neutral? Instead of taking the bait and assuming that it's really about something, or that it's telling you something you really need to know and do and put into action, what is it like to just be with it? So you can come at it from that standpoint. You can see that all of it is completely irrelevant to the actual moment. That sensation in the body does not dictate that you must then have the caffeine, and that you will be, miserable the rest of the day if you don't. There's no connection there. So you can take it that way. You can also use that as that clue that there's something which is not being met. There's a need here which is not caffeine, which is calling out for some sort of acknowledgement. So then you can say,
Hmm.
I see you, I hear you. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I recognize that there is something in my life that is out of balance. There is some way that I am not watching out for my own needs or taking care of myself. Or it might even be that there is, you know, we can also have kind of pathological levels of that as well, where it's like we have the basic idea that everybody, has a baseline level of needs that they have to meet, and that we should all be aware of what the healthy level of that is, and then work towards finding that healthy level so that we can have proper healthy boundaries with those around us, and we're not overextending, but we're also not underextending and becoming, super selfish and all that. But it's also possible that based on our history, we might be overly um a feeling of like over neediness because there's something else there that we're um uh you know some people take it to some kind of extremes of where I need to be in the center of everything all the time, and we can
Uh,
recognize that that is still a very egotistical thing as well. So we have like a base healthy need, and then we have the kind of overblown egoic sense. So it's also helpful, and I say this with a little bit of a caveat because some people can use this to their detriment, but be aware of how much ego is involved in that feeling of needing that thing. I just realized the
how much?
camera did a tight close-up.
Yeah, I
Um,
know it moves around all the time. I've mostly gotten used to it.
I'm sorry, I think I can turn it off. It was like a new Zoom feature that they put in, and it's doing it a lot, I think.
Well, I'm like I said, I've mostly gotten used to it. It used to be
Okay.
kind of throwing me off for a second. Now it's more just a case of, oh, there it is again, and then you refocus back on
I just
what's
looked at
actually
the
happening.
screen and was just like, that's a tough shot. Um,
But hold on, that last phrase you said though, I started to repeat that because that really kind of um, that had a certain ring to it. I may have to go back and just watch the video again, which I was planning on doing anyway. But boy, I wish I could remember what you just said.
is it about how much of it's just like sort of an overblown egoic sense?
Yeah, it was how much ego is involved in that. That
Yeah.
was an interesting phrase, and I can kind of get a vague gist of it, but really, really elaborate that idea.
Yeah. So, and this is why I said that I have a little bit of a caveat because people who tend to be very selfless, people pleasing, those type of people, we can s- often overextend ourselves, and we tend to be very self-deprecating and self-denying anyway. So then if you
Huh.
put onto that the idea that but you also, this need that you think you have might actually just be the ego, that can lead you down some really dangerous territories. And I've kind of been in that range too. So it's we
Huh.
have to find a healthy balance of, and this is where each person kind of has to find their own still point in the middle of where enough is enough, but not too much. And it's probably going to take some trial and error to find that out, because it's not necessarily intuitive for all of us. Like I said, a lot, depending on our background, some people have much higher thresholds of what they feel are their reasonable needs that must be met compared to others. For others, just having like absolutely no boundaries and just being there open and
Ah.
giving, giving, giving just feels totally natural because you're used to it. Doesn't mean it's healthy. Doesn't mean that that is actually a reasonable, sustainable way of living. Um, so finding a balance there is kind of each person's unique task. But when it comes to that, like that feeling of need, if I don't give myself the caffeine, and then you're like, it's okay, I've got you, and all of that. Also recognize, though, it's sort of a call to take stock of your life, to check in. Okay, are there places where I'm not meeting my own needs? Are there places where it really seems that I'm in kind of a deficit? Also be aware if this need for giving myself this thing is coming from that kind of egoic, self-reinforcing, um, uh, yeah, again, I'm trying to be really careful with how I say that, but it
Okay.
it's because in the especially like some of the Buddhist literature and actually also some of the Hindu the Advaita literature, there's a lot of like self-deprecation and a self denial, which is why there were so many ascetic traditions,
Hmm.
throughout India and throughout the East. Um, there's a danger in going to that extreme, but it's still pointing to something which is relevant. It's useful to question all of these urges and see how much self-gratification, how much self-reinforcement is involved in that seeming need for that thing. But it's not to then go to the extreme of complete self-deprivation and self-negation in that regard.
Right.
So it is finding a healthy balance. So it takes discernment among all of us who are doing this kind of work to not just take anything on as a full-blown assertion about the way things are and the way I have to practice it, but really use your discernment as to, okay, is this a thing that's telling me that really I am way too overly giving in my life and, just like truly am on the verge of burning out, and then maybe take note of that and do something about that? Or is it that it's funny because from my background being the overgiving one, it's even
Mhm.
hard for me to create examples of the opposite. So it's so funny the way our psychology is just derived, but that you know those who just feel like maybe certain narcissistic types would be the kind of obvious, extreme example of that, where it's like no matter what they get, it's never enough. There's always everything, the I has to be in the center of everything. I need more of this. And if I don't get that, if you don't say the right thing to me, I'm gonna feel like I've been, slighted and insulted and put down and, absolutely miserable because you didn't give me the thing that I thought that I needed. That's the like, pathological endpoint of that. But it's
Hmm.
relevant for all of us to be aware where on that spectrum we are and what these signals in the body are really saying. Are they telling us something that's relevant for us to be aware of in our daily life? Super important, though, to note that it's probably not about the object that we're craving, that we think we're craving, that's in front of us. That's a metaphor for something that we haven't seen elsewhere, right? The caffeine is a metaphor for a need which isn't being met on another level. It's virtually never about the actual caffeine.
Right.
Being aware of how much of our needs are healthy and necessary, and how much we are equating other things with needs which aren't. Or, that's when it gets into like preference territory. So like
Hmm.
my kind of rough and ready go-to definition of a need is something where if you don't have that, it impacts your mental and physical well-being. Like it's if you don't if somebody doesn't uh or if you don't uh um honor your needs, it's something which is detrimental to you physically or mentally or emotionally, something like that. Everything else is basically a preference. Those are the things that you need to
Huh.
survive in a basic, healthy way. Everything beyond that is just an optional. I would like for it to be this way, you know.
Hmm.
So having that as kind of a guidepost can be really helpful.
Okay. That begins to head in the direction of answering some questions I've had about that sort of thing in the last couple of months or so about um, setting aside, something happens and there's a feeling in the body and there's some thoughts with it. You investigate it and you're able to let it go. You go, okay, well, that really isn't such a big deal. Whereas something might come up, you can do the same thing. And then what you've done is you've investigated away something that really needed you to address it because there was some part of that that really is problematic and perhaps even unhealthy. Um, Kind of going back a step, I wanted to also mention that I'm coming to the place I'm at from having been much more self-centered and
Mm,
not able to see other people and their needs and respond to that very effectively. I mean, I wasn't completely self-absorbed, but it was something that was out of balance, and it was brought to my attention in a um, very mean-spirited kind of way in my
okay.
very early sobriety.
Yeah,
But I also recognized that even though they were being a complete ass about it, and they served, they were really seeking nothing more than to just be mean,
yeah,
but there was some truth in it. And I
yeah,
had to set aside what they were doing and how they were doing it in order to look at the fact that, yeah, hey, there's some truth here. And it's
yeah,
been a lifelong process from that point in 2005 or so. Um, but so for me, it feels good, even though it's not easy.
yeah,
And even there are times that perhaps it becomes frustrating and I want to, be able to just stop. Ultimately, it feels good to be able to respond to Susanna
yeah,
Tuesday and other people and their needs because it's such a shift away from the way I used to be, where I really
yeah,
couldn't respond well or effectively to what other people genuinely needed.
yeah.
But having said that, there was something that showed up a couple of days ago where this whole thing with Tuesday and I haven't been comfortable with it, and I really couldn't put my finger on why. And then the other night, I realized, when we had something happen a few months ago where Tuesday was really uncomfortable with something, is she insisted that we do something different. And it's something that kind of, it involves and affects everyone to some extent. And Susanna was all for it. I had to kind of come around to it and like, okay, that's fine. She wants that, then that's what we'll do. Um, Susanna had something recently where it made her uncomfortable, and it was something involving both of us. And um, instead of pressing her to do one or the other of these two possible options that we'd worked out, I just, okay, I'll compromise completely here and
Mhm.
we'll do this instead. That way you're not uncomfortable. And I pointed that out to her. I said, I'm not comfortable with him spending the night. I don't know exactly why, but I know
Mhm.
part of it is because when you guys are uncomfortable, we respond to your needs and give you what it is that you feel like you need or want in
Yeah,
those cases. It's happened that I told her about the thing with Tuesday, and then I pointed out the thing
yeah,
with her recently. I said, but when I am uncomfortable with something, no one seems to care. They keep pushing for this thing they want, and you don't understand why it bothers me. But the thing is, it makes me uncomfortable. Why is there a different standard for me?
yeah.
And fortunately, she was able to hear that and receive it. And go, you know
Amazing.
what? You're right. You're right. So,
Amazing.
um, so I can keep going long after there's really not much else to give in terms of taking care of her and all the other things that need my attention here in our house and in our life. But at the same time, I am able to draw a line and say, hold on a minute. Now here's where I stop um, giving everyone else what they want or need, and instead, I'm uncomfortable here, and I need you to recognize that it's not this is something in our life that is not being handled in a way that is fair or respectful.
Yeah.
So I'm able to draw that line.
Which is excellent. And it is one of those things where each person has to find and use some introspection to find what the appropriate level is, because all of our conditioning is determining not just how much uh where that line is, but also how we interpret it. Like for instance, you coming from, like you said, you had a well uh, coming from a background of where you weren't really able to take other people's needs into consideration, and you were kind of on the forefront. That puts you where your interpretation of what giving is now is going to be colored by how much you were able, the capacity that you were able to feel back then. And so
Hmm.
what might feel like a whole lot of giving for you now might feel like much less for somebody else who,
Uh,
grew up from a different perspective where just giving, giving, giving all the time and never having any other viewpoint otherwise. So it's really to note that there's no like uh set standard amount of altruism or self-gratification that is like an even norm. It's
right.
different for everybody, and our interpretation of it is based on the conditioning that we have had up till that point. So
Hmm.
we the more we can get sort of out of our God, that's a weird way to put it, but the more we because we can't escape our conditioning, but we can kind of get some perspective that transcends our conditioning, if that makes sense. Like we can become aware of our conditioning and then start to recognize that my experience now is conditioned, and I can see how other people might actually experience things differently. That kind of gives us that more of an expansive way of looking so that our version of I'm really being pushed to the limits, I'm giving so much, can be put into perspective when we see how much other people are like, yes, and I've given a kidney to a stranger and I've done, like all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, perspectives here. Um, but likewise the other way, when we feel like, my normal level of giving is just normal, and then we realize that like other people have a life where their needs seem to matter and mine don't. It's things like that. Like, oh, okay, so maybe I do need to reinvestigate how much it's okay to say no to people. Like, we all need to find that sort of comfort zone where we're, like I said, meeting our base level bodily, mental, emotional needs and having them met to a certain extent. And then but to do that, it helps to be able to see from that greater perspective that other people are living these lives which look very different. And I know that it feels different for them, but that means that my version of this is not true either. That this is not, this is just a scale that I have created based on my conditioning, or that's been created, in my biology based on my conditioning. And that it doesn't have to have that ring of truth about it. It can be questioned and it can be changed. So people who are inveterate people pleasers can get to the point where they can start to feel at first uncomfortable saying no to people and actually, looking out for themselves. And it's a practice, and you get more and more comfortable as time goes on. And for those who are not, as you found, those who are not used to looking out for the needs of others and taking that into consideration, you can start to do that. And it feels really uncomfortable at first. And it, gets less and less uncomfortable the more time goes on, the more used to it you get, and the more you start to sense that, okay, my outer boundaries can actually accept that. I can accept that I'm not directly at the forefront of every consideration that I make, and it's actually feels good a little bit sometimes to help other people out and to be there for them, and then that starts to kind of expand. But we're all a work in progress to find that balance. There's no you know easy center line there that we just default to. We're all conditioned
Right.
one way or another.
Huh. Hmm. Well, when you say that there's no way to find an easy center line, um, is that are you saying that because you're speaking to the fact that there are probably a large number of people who would automatically assume that there is some sort of, um, to use your words, easy center line, that there is some sort of default position for this that applies to everyone universally.
Yeah, and even within ourselves, like if you put a cork in a bathtub, it just bobs on the surface, right? It doesn't sink all the way down and it doesn't float up into the air. It just bobs. So,
Mhm.
but we're not the same way. We're
Right.
products of our conditioning. That there is no like, the idea that we maybe would have is like if I you know, stop striving for this and stop putting my egoic attachments onto this. I'm just going to find the like default, like to like the perfect state of being in terms of, my giving and taking just automatically even out and I just become this kind of perfectly buoyant being. And it's just not that way because we are products of all this conditioning. It's still the whole way that we even view what that level of buoyancy is, that perfect buoyancy, is based on our unique conditioning. We don't even have a universal idea of how much giving is the appropriate amount of giving and how much taking is the appropriate amount of taking. That is individually biased based on the lives that we have had and the experiences we've run into. So we can't default to something that is just this like perfect stasis because we're starting with biased programming to begin with, and we don't even know what that feels like for us. Even if we were to, well, we can't find it, but even if we were to find something like that, we wouldn't even necessarily know it because our conditioning doesn't lead us to having that as a like an obvious base point that we just default to.
Right.
It's finding something that feels comfortable over time as this self thing that's here, as this, progression of selves that make up the human lifetime. As they change, you are going to recognize that different states of levels there seem more comfortable. And
Hmm.
it's not to say that you have found the one that is now perfect for you. It's going to constantly change as this,
Right.
like I said, progression of selves that we take to be, you know, the me of a lifetime. It's all in flux. And so the level that of giving that feels acceptable now is going to be different than it is in 10 years, one way or another.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I was just initially I was curious, the intention or motivation behind that, but I mean it makes sense to me. I mean I more or less tend to default to the idea that everything is always relativistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting because the way you used the word bias at one point, it almost sounded like whether or not you meant to, it almost sounded like you were using it in the sense of when something needs to be biased, like an electrical component, its operating
Oh,
level needs to be set. And
that's
then,
fine. I wasn't using that, but that's a great way to.
well, yeah, because it's actually just another sort of metaphor for this because, someone is operating at this level with regard to this situation, and then later on they find that that needs to change, and it's just like the electrical equivalent. This component is operating at this level of voltage, but oh, something's happened, it's changed, and now you need to alter that, and so you get in to make the changes necessary to alter the bias or alter its operating level.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really, really good metaphor for it. As it is, yeah, and it's interesting because like in your case where you maybe psychologically we could draw a clear line there, but I mean, like as a kid, your needs weren't being met. So perhaps we could say that you overcompensated for a while there and were,
uh,
you know, very self-involved with, okay, nobody else is, plus it also hasn't been modeled for you to take care of other people. You didn't learn that. It was that if you don't take care of you, nobody else is going to.
yeah, you're
And
right.
you get that as your starting point, that this is how I learned to exist in a world. my needs aren't being met by out there, I'm going to figure out what I need to do. In some cases, that is also just kind of numbing ourselves to the feeling of discomfort of being human in a miserable world that isn't fulfilling my needs.
Right.
So we find different ways to numb it. And like you said, whether it's food or alcohol or drugs or whatever else, we try everything because it keeps us from feeling that sense of discomfort of being alive. And then over time, that kind of gets calcified into what we take to be a personality that then is uh, um, self-obsessed or self-concerned person, we would define it. But it's very, linear view of the conditioning that kind of leads up to it. And now, thankfully, you're at this point where that has changed and it's opened out. And this new, temporary self that's here sees things from this perspective. It's different. It's learning new behaviors. It's learning new options. So it's this constant, re rebiasing of what was there. You saw that was, you know, uh, the system was biased in one way, that the world will not fulfill my needs. I need to watch out for me in order to be safe and secure. One of the best ways I can do that is to numb myself in whatever way possible and provide myself all the little treats so I feel like I'm doing something for myself and feel better. And then the more we expand our mind, the more we see other viewpoints, the more we become open to seeing beyond just this kind of mirrored bubble that we're in. We start to recognize, oh, well, there are other people out there, and actually, it's kind of nice to help out. And oh, I can actually feel when they're doing something nice for me, and I feel how that feels, and so that must feel good for them. And we can start to kind of, reach out in that way, and then it just starts to expand and change, and your level of where you were with uh I mean, at one point, maybe when you were 15, uh doing, I don't know, taking the garbage out might have felt like this huge imposition, and now your level of imposition has become much greater than it once was. Now you can do a lot more things before reaching that level of, why me? And that's constantly changing bar.
Yeah. Huh. Well, something you touched on in there, or was kind of woven into it, is something that I've kind of been wondering about for the last 24 hours, and it's not anything new. We've talked about this and come at it from a number of different directions over this time where we've been having these conversations. But um, let me see. I'm trying to think of exactly how how this was understood in this case because it goes to two things. One is, let me see if it is in here. Let me check. It's funny. I have quotes from you or chunks of emails that you've sent to me in various places. I've got it in a notepad where I take notes when watching videos. I've got it in my journal that is specifically for this work. Um, I've got saved emails, and I've even got I use the heck out of this notepad function on this phone. And
Oh,
I
that's
saw
amazing.
something the other night. And I wonder what that is because it's titled "Working with Thought," and I find I've just managed to take a bunch of quotes from you regarding this, and it's one of these little notes that was made. Um,
That's wonderful.
uh, so let's see. Was it this? I think it was. Yeah, it was kind of a little bit of this, and I'll just read this real quickly because um, you're referencing something I'd said to you. The dissolving into thoughts bit is quoted because that's something I'd said to you. You said, as for the dissolving into thoughts bit, I suspect it's because it's coming from the perspective, here's the operative part, from the perspective of one who is viewing the thoughts from a distance, right? Don't think of a thought as something special. It's just another sensory appearance. In the same way that you could open your eyes and dissolve the seer into the seen or the hearer into the heard, you can dissolve that seer or hearer into the sensory experience of the thoughts too. And then I'll jump from that to something you posted the other day, which was an excerpt of one of our conversations regarding the belief in free will.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And something I've been noticing for, I guess, the last 3 days is, and it's something I've noticed before, but I'm noticing it from a new point of view with regard to what I just read to you and what was in that video, that there's this assumption of someone here doing something or knowing something or seeing something. And I there was a point in time, if we rewind back a little ways, where I was really on the lookout for that all the time. That was very much a pretty strong habit to take note of that under certain circumstances. And then I kind of moved away from that because other practices and other things had kind of taken over from that. And then in the last few days, I've noticed where maybe I'm uncomfortable and there's this automatic assumption of someone who's experiencing that discomfort or kind of like what you were touching on in the video or that excerpt about the belief in free will, that that sense of someone doing something was something that had begun to get a certain degree of being dissolved from
Mm.
constantly looking for what's happening at that moment of decision. Well, like I said, I've kind of moved away from that. Other things have started to kind of take its place, other practices and what have you. But now I'm sort of noticing that there is this assumption of someone who can do something or someone who is doing something, and that excerpt about the belief in free will is a near perfect summation of this idea that you can see through the sense of the illusion of being someone. You can really get that first fetter in a real solid, strong way. And it
Yeah.
hasn't been shaken. It
Yep.
hasn't reverted. You still understand that there's no one here.
Yeah.
There's no one here. There never was.
Yeah.
There are all these other things at work, but it's not me or I or whoever.
Yeah.
But at the same time, with that full well-being in place, and I don't know if it's a matter of habit or what it is, you can do things and be operating, and it's usually, from what I can tell, extremely subtle. You have to stop and look for it. You have to start paying attention for it to see that free will. Oh, okay, well, I think I can do something. There's this
Mm.
assumption, no matter how subtle,
Yeah.
of someone who is doing something, someone who's taking an action. And as all of this has
Yeah.
started to become clearer over the last few days, I realize that's something that, yeah, I think it needs some attention. I think that's something that's
Mm.
an area that is again ripe for practice. And I could
Yeah.
default to things we've discussed in the past and things I've got written down, but it feels like it really feels like it's appropriate at this point in time to say, and maybe this is more appropriate just for the sake of someone else watching this. I don't know.
Mm.
But it seems like it's appropriate to ask the question, okay, how do we work with that? How do we begin to work with that subtle assumption of someone there so that we can begin to kind of uproot and dissolve that assumption?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good. What you said first kind of sparked the question of, or well, question slash explanation. Um, when we were talking about thoughts, for instance, and there's like when you say you see through the first fetter side of things, and it's very strong, and we see that this is very clearly there's nobody here.
Right?
I think it's important to take a moment to recognize what we're really saying there, though,
Hmm.
because there's an idea even nestled in that there is someone who has recognized that they do not exist,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
If we use maybe a cleaner way of talking about it, that there is clearly a body here on one level of discussing things anyway. We could also say it's cells and microorganisms and all these things, but we'll say that there's a human body here. There's a brain. There's this whole nervous system which has been created to interact with the world however it seems to exist out there. Part of that humaning that goes on is that there's a creation of thoughts. When you have a brain, you have thoughts of some form or another. It's what they do.
Hmm.
So the brain is, taking care of a lot of biology in the body, but it's also generating a lot of thoughts for one reason or another. And some of those thoughts, because of our, evolutionary patterns, have become very uh, self-referential and sort of self-aware. That we can have a thought that says that I am a body who has a brain and is having a thought, which is by itself a pretty wild thing.
Yeah.
And we probably shouldn't take that for granted, but we
No,
do.
I agree.
But we do. And but within that, we have to recognize that what we're talking about is that there's never been a single solitary unchanging self who has existed from the moment of birth to and will exist to the moment of death. Instead,
Right.
like I said before, you kind of have this, to our experience is maybe something more like a progression of little selves. You have this like little moment of Darrell who believes this and who feels this and who is alive right now, and then another little Darrell that pops up that believes something else and has some sort of, relative relationship to because there's access to memories and all these other things that gives it this kind of feeling of momentum and progression and causality of one to the other to the other to the other, that sort of thing. But the actual experience of both believing that we're a self and having an experience of no self and then believing that there's no self is all generated by the same no self-existent mechanism of a brain that is creating thoughts about all these things. It's a thought that believes something, it's a thought that doesn't believe something, and it's a thought that believes something again. These are just individual thoughts. So the belief, whether it's about free will or my personal existence or the fact that this body exists the way that I think it does, or that there are, little space dwarfs on the moon, whatever it is um it's an idea that's in the mind. It's this mind-generated temporary thought. And that is the foundation of everything that exists in our experience is some sort of mind-generated temporary thought. The belief in free will, it's built on that same sort of postulation of there having to be one in there who is either in control of or at the very least aware of each of those individual thoughts and who somehow has an inherent existence all of its own.
Huh.
Where it's complicated is that there is a body that acts upon a world, and there are other bodies in the world that act upon this body, and there is this kind of interaction that happens. The question
Hmm.
is how much there is a how much of that is a willful core inherent being that's here that makes choices and makes choices, makes decisions that is completely free from all the conditionality that has created it. Can that exist? Does that exist? We
I,
can logic our way out of it and say no, but note what your actual experience is. The
huh.
experience of trying to do something or feeling like you can do something is constantly belying that sense of the one who seems to be at the crux of all of our, internal existence. It's positing that there is still some being in there who can make that decision. So every time the idea of free will or the ability to do something comes up, it can be a quick reminder to turn that mirror around and say, okay, so who is that one who is supposedly doing this. Where is that experience right now? Or which part of the experience right now feels as though I have agency? Who is the I who has the agency? What part of my direct experience seems to be saying that I know how to do all of the things that need to be done to make that idea into a reality, whatever the idea is, whether it's picking up a glass to get another cup of drink of water, or whether it's, planning a trip around the world. It doesn't matter what the extent of it is. There's an idea that there is a core being in here who is able to do all of this completely of its own volition, and that it has nothing to do with you know, all of its past experiences and the biology and limitations in the body itself and the limitations of gravity and physics and all of those other things. There's this idea that this core being has absolute, control of itself and of its relationship to the world. Turn it around and look, where is that one? In which of the sense fields does that one appear? How does it show up? Is there anything but a thought and possibly some habitual tension or, feelings of muscle activation or something in the body that gives the impression that this being can do something? How do you know? How can you prove that? Um, it's really breaking apart our experience so that we don't take anything at face value. We don't take anything for granted. We really just question every part of it. Um, and there's so much in our thinking about the self, or thinking about thought, or thinking about what it's like to be alive that has nested in it that belief in a fundamental self. Which is why I said that even when we talk about having seen through the self, it's implying a self who has seen through the self.
Right.
What we really have is a constantly changing pattern of thoughts. And you have um, growing up, say in a Christian household where you're taught that you're a soul that exists and it has was entered into a body at some point and is going to have this eternal existence from then on, even outside of the body. That is a belief that the mind takes on, and then it creates a whole world which aligns with that belief as long as it lasts. Then all of a sudden, one day you find out, you start talking to an atheist, or you start talking to a Buddhist or a Hindu or something else, and you start getting these other ideas. Now, all of a sudden, that complete viewpoint where that is the only truth might get shaken. Now you have a brain that can also generate a second idea about, well, what if there isn't a soul? And then you have, you start doing meditation classes and you start having experiences, and then the brain starts to take in new information and it can also generate these ideas that maybe there's no self either. Well, it's a weird one. I always thought I was a self. And then the more you have, basically what you have is a brain which is capable of generating all sorts of ideas. Some of them, for one reason or another, feel more true at one given point of your life than others, right? In this moment, it feels true that there's no self. 30 years ago, it felt true that there was. There's something about the thought which has a sense of veracity to it, but it's not an objective, uh, uh, you know, indication from somewhere outside in the world that it is really like ontologically true. It's just that this is something which feels internally true for me right now. It might not in, another 5 minutes. We don't know. Having the perspective where it's a mind, which or a brain, which has learned certain things and is now capable of creating all of these alternate versions of reality, all of these alternate ideas. It learns to hold them all lightly. Sometimes some gets more belief and has more veracity than others. I have learned that the earth is round, and I have also learned that there are other people who believe it's flat. This brain can generate both of those ideas. It still feels that the round one is more likely, and it still feels like that one's probably true, but it knows that other options exist. So I think it's relevant when we're talking about any of this stuff to keep having that reference point that there truly was not a self involved in any of this. There was no inherently existing permanent self that was here. There was a variety of thoughts and personality traits and attributes and conditioned behaviors that have shown up. And they continue showing up in different ways. But that conditioning leads us to different thoughts and different experiences and different beliefs and different patterns of behavior. And with all of those, what I take to be me, what other people take to be me, changes. And so we have that flexibility where I'm not attached to being any one particular way with any definition, no matter what it is, whether it's gender, political belief, religious ideology, or anything else. It's all just this open, free flow of experience. And there are thoughts that make that happen. And there are thoughts that recognize that there's thinking happening, but that's still a thought. There are direct experiences of senses, and then there's the recognition that that sense appearance is itself something that's being generated right now by the brain in its own virtual world, so that there is absolutely nothing that can be experienced which is not in some way a thought. And that is ironically another thought which is being thought about the nature of existence. And it's fascinating, but we can't take any of it for absolute truth because it is all thought. And it's all just this biased, conditioned thought. You don't know.
Yeah.
There might be a point in a year, 10 years, that all of a sudden you fully believe that there's a self again. Like, not just because you've forgotten something or lost something, but because you have had enough experiences that have completely convinced you otherwise, and that you were completely wrong. That that experience that you had of no self and all of that, completely wrong. And we don't know. It's possible. We're not finding some ultimate ground of truth here. We're recognizing the complete fallibility and manipulatability and flexibility and fluctuatedness of everything that we take to be the world as we experience it. And it is just thought, commenting on thought with more thought.
And getting caught up in a feedback loop with bodily sensations.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the bodily sensations themselves are still mind generated, right? There's a
Yeah.
body here and it's triggering electrical sensations, but those electrical sensations have to be interpreted and made into something by the brain. So there's
Right.
no part of our experience. And that's what I kind of last week I had said that, it's helpful for what we were talking about to take bodily sensations as being sort of real in their one way and thoughts as kind of real in a different way, but that ultimately it's all mind generated. There is nothing that we experience that actually
Stagnant mind.
exists in a way that isn't mind generated. We have no possible way to interact with anything that isn't mind generated in some fashion.
Man, there was, I forget where it was, what Sutta it was in, but there was this one line that was attributed to the Buddha. Um, the mind is the forerunner of all things. And the more time passes, the more I really understand and see just how absolutely true, if anything is, that that is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So,
really remarkable that he had those insights thousands of years before we had the biological insight of what the brain really was capable of and how all of this is, comes about. I mean, it's just fascinating. And it's truly remarkable the level of insight that he had from just exploring his own direct experience.
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to go too far down this road, but when you consider that he was far less encumbered with all kinds of ideas and concepts and what have you, because life was much simpler then for a long list of reasons. he had less, it seems to me, could be wrong, but it seems to me he had less stuff to filter through to get to direct experience. So he could get to direct experience in a really very clear, direct way.
Yeah. Yeah. It is
So,
interesting though when you read not only the sutras but some things which were, even written like 1,000 or 500 years ago that people have always been complaining about. Obviously, we've taken the things to a whole other level with like social media and the internet and things like that, but it's always been about people's, obsession with distractions and entertainment and all this stuff. And when you think of what there was then compared to what there was now, and still it was being referred to then, and if you didn't know better, you would think that they had, Netflix and stuff back then that was like just as prevalent as it is now. And when you think what that level of entertainment was, and it was still seen as a problem, it was still seen as a distraction and a deterrent, deterrent from experiencing, things the way that they were. It's
huh.
really remarkable that, we are basically living in, kind of like a Huxley nightmare of we
Yeah, you're right.
really gotten to that state, and we were completely unaware of it. But apparently, even those, moderate entertainments of the past were still enough for people to fulfill this purpose that we're still talking about. We just have way more options at our fingertips at any given moment.
The world has become SOMO writ large.
Yeah, it really has. It absolutely has. I mean,
So, going back to that idea, when something comes up and there's this awareness of awareness and acknowledgement of, okay, so there's a subtle sense of someone who's experiencing that or knows that, and I do more or less what you described and stop and break it down and think, okay, so how is this even happening? How does this even have the ability to manifest? Okay, so there's seeing, there's hearing, there's feeling in the body, there's this thought. Um, and I can very quickly go through all of that and break it all down and see that, there's just these basic experiences, sensory experiences. And then what almost a great deal of the time pops up right on the heels of that is, um, and it's not really so much in words, it's just kind of a feeling. And it may be a bodily thing, but there's this sense of there's something you're missing. There's something you're overlooking. If you'll investigate more deeply, if you'll investigate a little more intensely, if you'll just really dig into that, you're going to find there's something there that you were overlooking that will show you where this is coming from, as if the fact that the sense fields are somehow not enough to explain
mhm.
how a sense of an assumption of someone arising isn't enough in and of itself.
It's,
And so it's kind of been a problem. But then what occurred to me was, and kind of on the heels of what you just said, as well as what I read to you that I had saved to my phone, is
mhm.
that, well, that's just another thought. It's just another
Exactly.
thought. I mean,
Exactly.
it doesn't give it any truth. It's not a testament to its veracity.
No, not at all. And it's actually ironically, I mean, that one's particularly funny because who in that moment is it that needs to dig deeper? Like when you've gone through and you've seen there's nothing to be found in any of the sense fields, and then you have an idea of this, but you need to just dig a little deeper, get a little clearer on it. What is it talking to? Right? Is that thought, first of all, you? Or is that, are you possessed by some other being that's telling you that you need to dig deeper? Um, if it's not, if it is you, then who is it speaking to? If it's not you, then how many other beings are alive in this, in this mind that's going back and forth, and how trustworthy are they? But the fundamental point is, without going down those, head trips, the fundamental point is what is the one that it seems to be speaking about that can actually dig deeper? And I think the clarity there comes from when you notice what would you do to then dig deeper?
Well, and that's a good question. There's something else I want to add to that. What would we do to dig? What would I do to dig deeper? But
Yeah.
the other thing too is the fact that the reason that's coming up is because there's something that feels like if we can dig deeper and find this other thing, then we'll be more convinced. I need to
Mm.
be convinced,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's that wrapped up in it too.
Yeah. Interesting. And oh God, so many things there. So first of all, what would what would it even mean to be convinced? What would that, I can't ask you what it would feel like, but like, what, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Like there's a whole issue with that being convinced. It's basically just saying that I want to have another thought that takes precedent over other thoughts, and that thought is now going to feel true to me in another way. For what reason? There has to be like a goal attached. There's this idea that I'm going to be better, freer, looser,
I can
something.
tell you exactly what it is.
What's that?
The built-in assumption is that if we can dig deeper and find something that will convince the mind of the truth of this, that there will be this incredible moment of profound, earth-shaking insight that will once and for all dispel this ability to have any belief or assumption in someone here, no matter how subtle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, the irony of that is, how do we even if one of those experiences happened, and they're very rare, but let's say if
Mhm.
it even does, how do you denote that that was even a true experience and not a psychotic break? Like we can't determine that anything we experience is a hallmark of ultimate truth. Whether it's, just because it feels right to you doesn't mean that it
Mm,
is. Just because the mind feels convinced of it, look around you. There are billions of people on this earth that are absolutely convinced to the point of blowing themselves and other people up to
mhm.
prove that they are correct because it feels fucking right to them. You can't trust that. We cannot trust that.
You're right.
So, no level of conviction that you reach is going to ultimately mean anything in that regard because you can always create another mind loop around it to draw question or doubt to that which you feel is fundamentally true. In,
Oh, oh, go ahead.
Instead, what I would say is having that experience of you, you look, you can't find. The mind is saying, "Oh, but if you just looked a little bit more." Turn that into looking again for that which is going to be able to dig more. And the reason I asked you, what would it actually feel like to dig more, to be more focused, you'll probably notice that you like tighten up certain muscles. There's
Mhm.
more physical engagement in the body.
Yep.
Makes you feel
Having a
like
strong sense of intention.
strong sense of intention. Exactly. Feels like you're really doing something. You're knuckling down. What is it really? How is that doing anything? You can't even say how you are gripping your muscles. You can't even do that. There's no agent there to be able to make that happen. Recognizing the absurdity in the moment of what's being asked for and what is being accepted as proof goes to ironically undercut or undermine that that feeling that we have of um, belief that it is even possible, because what it really, I would even go so far as to say anytime we pick up a belief, it's ultimately problematic. So the belief
Yeah.
in no free will is just as much of a problem as a belief in free will. What we're doing is to investigate those beliefs when they get kind of negated or we don't find something. That negation, where it's just kind of left in that middle void point, is the point of freedom, where there's no thought about I have free will or I do not have free will, both of
Ah.
which again postulate a self who has or doesn't have, but it's really in that moment in between thoughts where the freedom is.
So is the same true when something happens and it sets in motion the movement to investigate, to see how a self is arising in this moment. What is the mechanism that allows it to
Mhm.
manifest? And even if it's, often for me, I do it very quickly because I've done it so many times.
Yep.
But so even if we do it quickly and we go through, that whole list of things and we find there's nothing there in that moment after completing the investigation and finding there's nothing there, is that also again that same point of freedom?
Well, it depends on how it's felt, but hopefully, yes. You
Okay.
know, if
Okay.
you're locked into, but damn it, I have to find it, then no. If it's like if there's like a feeling of
Wow, there's really nothing there.
there's more striving, even if it's like that locking into, haha, I've seen there's nothing there. You just created a new self, in that moment, a new self has
Ah.
arisen. So investigate again. Um, it's it's really a fundamental issue of the belief in anything, whether it's a belief in a self or a belief in a no self, or belief in free will, a belief in no free will. They're useful antidotes for the other for a time. We talk about there's no free will because we've been so locked into the idea that there is. We need that to jar us out of it. Just like the Christian who's brought up in the idea of a soul talks to an atheist, you hear the opposite. It undercuts that belief in the soul. It doesn't really give you any place to stand. Now, if you go to the but there is no, well, you're just locked into another framework again, and there's no reason to think that that's any more true than anything else. We keep swinging for that. The pendulum keeps swinging from one side to the other, from one extreme to the other, until we kind of find that center point of balance in between the beliefs, where there's just that being, just that openness, where we don't even need to talk about free will or no free will. You just see this constant kind of flow of things happening. The idea of free will or no free will is something that has to be formulated and backed by the mind to further some sort of um, ulterior motive. There has to be something involved with it, even postulating that. You have free will when I want to punish you for doing something, when I want to create an orderful society where everybody has to, live by certain rules, and you need to be, create a punitive thing. We have to have the idea of free will. When you've been locked into that and you really feel like, I'm such a shameful, horrible person because I have made mistakes in the past and I could have done differently and I should have done differently, and if only, then we take the belief that wait, there was no free will there. You literally were acting out of conditioning, like that body that doesn't even have a self to be shameful or to be blamed for things. This is just an ongoing part of experience of the whole totality of being that creates this one particular moment of a person doing something that is in no way separate from absolutely everything else that has come before it from the entire beginning of the cosmos. That is a perfect antidote to that. And it's something that we can feel into, and it can completely shift our experience of everything. But we also don't want to get locked into that belief that there's no free will and there's no self and all of that, because ultimately that just becomes another belief and we're locked there too. We're constantly undercutting bit by bit everything by the use of the opposites temporarily. And then in the middle point, where we are neither in free will nor non-free will, neither in self nor non-self, then there is just that feeling of just everything just is. Like it's just this kind of open state of being.
Um, as you were talking, and as we're both um, uh, discussing this, I'm once again reminded um, of, and I say this because it's astonishing. I didn't realize how utterly spot on the guy was, but the late author thinker Robert Anton Wilson, he wrote about this kind of stuff in his writings cover a lot of ground, but there are four books in particular. One is um, Quantum Psychology, and then another one is a trilogy, the Cosmic Trigger trilogy. And in those four books, he talks about all of this and he elaborates on it at length and he really sums it up perfectly. And he said if there was ever a religion he was interested in, it was Buddhism.
Mm.
But at the same time, he wasn't landing on Buddhism for all the reasons you just described.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's this great explanation of all of this that you could almost call non-Buddhism for non-Buddhists,
I
you
love that.
know?
Absolutely.
And it really is a great summation and description of all of this stuff, especially for anyone who, for whatever reason, doesn't quite get Buddhism or isn't comfortable with it, or
Mm.
some reason it just doesn't click for them. That would be a great way for someone to really get this, and also a great review for this because you were basically just saying more or less all of the same things he said.
Amazing.
You said it in a number of different ways, and he did the same thing in those four books. He said the same thing in a number of different ways.
I
And
love
it's
that.
funny, I forget which one it is. I think it may have been at the end of the third book in the Cosmic Trigger trilogy, where he quotes the last line from a fairly well-known play from guess it was around like the 1920s, 30s. It was around that time when there was all of that explosion of creativity in all of the different arts.
Mm.
And you know, there was a lot of really progressive, very unusual stuff going on there. But anyway, I can't remember the author of it. I can't remember the name of the play. I just remember the last line, and he was using this to kind of finally hit the point home was there is no firmament.
Right. Yep. Yep.
You know, and then
Absolutely.
when you were talking, that's what it kept seeming to kind of point at is
Yeah.
there is no firmament, but most people will be terrified by that idea.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there is no firmament, and getting to that point, and it's like, yeah, there isn't, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And the mind clings. The mind, it's that whole thing about suffering being caused by attachments. So
Mhm.
much of that is attachment to form, attachment to things needing to be a certain way, attachment to my beliefs and, my assumptions about the world and all of that being real. Um, it really takes a profound letting go to recognize that this is just the way that things are for us in our experience. And, it's everything is impermanent. Everything is under flux, in a state of flux. Everything is just constant change. And there's no way to say anything fundamentally about anything. Even the state that is permanent, that it's impermanent, is a little bit too much. I mean, we don't even know if that's true, right? Like in our experience, that seems to be the case, but you know, we have no concept of the way that the time really works, how the universe really works, if everything is um, already happened all at once and we're just, seeing snapshots of it as we go through it. We have no idea. We fascinating ideas about the universe exist, and we don't know if any of them are true, really.
Right, right.
But it could be that everything is literally permanent, that the universe has, created once, it just poof into existence all at one time. Our experience of it seems to be linear, but that it all just actually exists as one permanent thing. We have no idea. We don't know if that's true or not, you know? So, and we can't tell that by our direct experience. We can't tell that by any means that we have. Um, and we have to question what the necessity of needing that would even be. I mean, there's obviously scientific fascination and all of that is great, and having that curiosity and intellectual curiosity about the world, there's nothing wrong with that. It's all wonderful. But usually, when we're clinging for answers or beliefs, it's because it's creating a sense of comfort or at least driving away that fear of the unknown. So there's probably something that we're striving to know that because we're trying not to feel the discomfort of not knowing.
Well, the fear of the unknown, as well as the fear of uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah,
in a world where, I mean, how do you get certainty? I mean, really, how?
it does not.
I don't have the foggiest notion,
No,
you know?
there's nothing out there that we can, we like I think as humans, we have to kind of pretend most of the time that there is, we know tomorrow's coming. We know, we pretend at least I can make plans and like I can plan something that's going to happen next year, and I'm assuming I'm going to be alive for it and that the world is going to be in the state that it's currently in by then, and things are the way they are. We have no idea that any of that's going to be true. We could be dead. Everybody could be dead. There could be another pandemic. You could have, massive, an asteroid could hit. Like anything can happen, and we don't know. So, I mean, we have actually by the time this airs, it will or goes online, it'll be past then. But as of the time of recording, I think we're 2 weeks away from the passing of that.
Oh, the thing that Avi Loeb, the
Yeah.
Atlas 3i or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. So we're assuming that this is going to go out on YouTube at some point, but we might be, in the middle of an alien takeover and nobody will ever see this because, the whole human race will be enslaved by the point that this is supposed to come out. We don't know.
Good reminder, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I lost it. There was something in there, but um, you know, I don't know that I would recommend today's conversation to somebody if they were new to this,
Probably.
whether it was brand new or in the early stages.
Yeah.
But and I could be wrong. I mean, it might be exactly the perfect thing for somebody. It might be so mind-blowing that it changes everything for them and starts them down that road. But we've had quite a few really incredible discussions. But today, truly, to use that expression my mom was so fond of, today truly takes the cake.
Wow,
I
wonderful.
mean, today's conversation has been, there aren't even words for it. I just know that multiple times as if we've been talking, that there's just been this sense of amazement and um, astonishment at the fact that, I mean, even just the seemingly coincidental way several things lined up in the
Yeah.
earlier part of this discussion
Yeah.
was really, I am really just, those are the kinds of things that make me wonder,
Yeah.
what's really going on here. Um, so today, really, this conversation has been um, not just incredibly helpful but also God, any language just seems woefully inadequate, but just incredibly powerful. I mean, this has had a lot of just I don't know this intensity to it, a quiet intensity, you know.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really happy about that. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I don't I used to try to stay in the habit of watching our recent discussions. Now it's not so firmly fixed. I might watch some of one, over a period of days, but a lot of times I'll either watch the excerpts you post or I'll watch something that Pernilla has done, whether in the past or recently, just whatever seems appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that can be dictated by just an idea, or YouTube will make a suggestion. I'm like, wow, how timely. Let's look
I
at
know.
that.
I know.
So that's kind of the way that things happen. But this one is something that I really have. There's this really strong drive to rewatch this and hear this again.
Amazing. Excellent.
So real quick though, to kind of
Yeah.
sum up, to succinctly sum up the issue or the question of responding to the assumption, especially that, I mean, any of it is appropriate, but especially that subtle assumption of someone being there.
Mm.
The thing to do is the thing that we've always talked about, the thing that you have always suggested again and again, which is to how is this happening? How does this even have the ability to manifest, and go through and investigate the sense fields.
Yeah. And any thought that comes up, recognize that that's still a thought. That
Yes,
even though
yes.
it thinks even though it claims to be pointing to something else, question the validity of where it comes from, right? How do I who is the hearer of it or the knower of the thought? Who does it seem to be referring to? If it, like we said, if the thought says, yes, but you should just, pay more attention and dig a little deeper, who is it referring to? Where is that thought pointing towards? Can the thought itself do the job? Could that thought be the thing that does it? Well, okay, if not, then what agency do any thoughts have? Is there one thought that can tell you to do the job and then another thought that comes up to do it?
Wow, you're right.
What is the experience of doing something which is not itself a thought? And it comes back to what we were talking about everything effectively being, mind generated. But if there's an idea that one type of thought can tell you to do something, and then you can have this experience of actually buckling down to do it, which part of your lived experience of buckling down to do it is not somehow mind generated? Where is the actual me who is taking control in the center of this experience that is not made up of any of the five senses, the components of the five senses? Is there really anything there which exists independent of the five sensory input, either from the external five senses or the internal mental five senses?
Right, right.
Recognizing ultimately that they're all mental five senses, but for the kind of state of investigation, um, what is here? Is there anything here that is not apparent in those five senses at any given moment? Because that's really when the mind creates that sense of, oh, but there's something else that you're missing, it's there's an idea that there is this kind of other subtle being, it's like that
Huh.
the energetic soul thing, which is not apparent in any of the other. But if it can't be found, what is it doing? Where is it? How is it interacting? What is the experience of it that is not knowable in any of those sensory fields? Right? We can't just say, like, to use the old metaphor, we can't just say that there's a teapot orbiting the sun and then just assume that, it is, even though I can't find it. Right? If it's there, you have to be able to find it. If there really is something here, it should be knowable in some way. Otherwise, it's just a belief that we've taken on. I can know in one level of speaking that there's a mala on my arm because, I can feel it, I can remember where it came from, I can move it, I can do things with it. In that one level of reality, I can say that that's, true. There's a truth to that. There's like an artifact that gives me information, whether it's real or not. I don't really know what the mala actually is made of outside of this internal representation of it. But, in the external or in my internal representation of it, there seems to be something in existence. The self doesn't even have that level of reality to it. There is nothing that is showing up in our senses that seems to be it, and yet we still have an idea that it has a fundamental existence.
Well, what you just said also, at least from this point of view, um, seems to point to something really important, and it's something that has taken a long time to really understand and take on, and recognize um, the usefulness of it, if nothing else. That, and this is, I'm kind of aiming this more at um, people that maybe are coming to this more recently.
Hmm.
that this type of inquiry, this type of investigation is a slowly acquired skill over time.
Yeah.
It's something that I recognize recently that I am still absolutely in the process of learning how to do it better, more
Mhm.
accurately, to remember more questions to ask in the process of doing it, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it.
So
I've,
even if somebody could write a book, even if somebody wrote a fairly thick pamphlet about how to do inquiry and investigation, and you went through and you read it several times and you memorized a bunch of it, it's still not going to get you to that point of where people get to, like you, after you've been doing it forever and a day.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's exactly right. And ironically, I have just written a book. It's not done yet, but it's exactly for that. But it's still even in that you have to actually do it. And it is you're exactly right. It's a skill that you need to work on to be able to have that level of awareness about. It's one of the reasons I love the Shinzen Young
Mhm.
unified mindfulness thing, where they really emphasize sensory clarity is so important. And that's
Ah.
one of the primary things. It's concentration, sensory clarity, and equanimity. And they're really the things that we're working with meditation. And the sensory clarity is so important for that reason, because that is the any type of inquiry we do, we need to become aware of what is which coming in through which sense field, what is really a thought, and in how exactly is that thought showing up? What is it's like the tone of what's in the body, how much of that are is being clouded by a thought or a belief or a um habitual conditioned way of experiencing it, like we talked about when you see the picture in the mind of the big mug of tea and you feel that positive affect in the body. That's just a conditioned response to it, but
Mm.
the positive affect in the body is not in itself a real thing either. It's not an inherently existing thing that is inherently positive. It's a mental association of something positive with that. And maybe we get some, positive brain chemicals and, hormones that give us a little boost of ooh when we think of it. And so that feels pleasant to us. But to recognize that even that ooh is just a sensation in the body, that the pleasantness that we uh, equate to uh, dopamine or serotonin or even oxytocin or things like that, we can recognize that that is a sort of learned experience. We feel it in the body, but what we make of it, our thoughts about it, our striving for more of it, the fact that we even view it as being inherently pleasant and not just kind of a neutral experience in the body, is
Hmm.
something which is not fundamentally the only way that it can be experienced. It's not a necessary inbuilt part of it. We're kind of conditioned to feel, certain experiences when we have those and feel a certain way towards it, which leads us into certain behaviors. But you can actually kind of short circuit that by becoming more and more aware as it's happening and just recognize that there is a certain neutrality to all experience which can be found, which is how we derive the equanimity, where it's okay
Ah.
to feel pain in the body, you can feel equanimous with that because you feel the kind of neutrality of those sensations without the overlays of negativity.
Right.
If you feel super, excited about something, you can also feel the kind of neutrality underneath that and recognize that this is a passing experience, no matter how blissful or exciting or happy or whatever it is. It's just a passing experience, that there's a neutrality of underneath that, and we can be okay with these passing waves because there's uh a they're impermanent and they come and go, but b there is a way of interacting with them where the the experience of it does not overwhelm and carry us
Right.
away the way that it did.
Yeah. Well, and what you just said, and again, I say these things and I tend to qualify it, but I think it's necessary that this is just the first stages of it. There's a lot of work to be done and time doing it before it deepens. But being sick the last week, that was the primary way of working with and interacting with all the various things that the body was generating
Mm.
that you know can very quickly lead to feeling overwhelmed or make the experience of being sick even worse
Yeah,
because the mind is acting on it, and in the process it gets amplified basically, for lack of a better word, it gets
completely.
amplified or intensified. And so you just described more or less how I had been working with it.
Amazing.
So, and I remind myself of, you'd said it some time back how all things are inherently neutral, and that's just my shorthand for that,
Yeah,
for working with it in the moment, to remind myself that that is the case. And like, well, all things are inherent, everything has an inherent neutrality.
it
So,
says that's wonderful.
well, I need to probably move pretty quickly. There are a couple of
Yeah,
things happening that would be better served if I get to them sooner rather than later.
I get that. I get that.
But I really appreciate today. I mean, today really is wow. You
Thank
know,
you. I'm so happy about that. Yeah, I'm glad, and I hope you get just as much on the re-listen.
oh, I don't see how I couldn't.
Mhm.
I don't see how I
Mhm.
couldn't. There's stuff here that it would be wise to um, try to see to its deepening and internalization.
I wish you luck with that. Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah,
It's just a
absolutely.
matter of time, matter of time
Absolutely.
and persistence.
It is, but and it just things unfold,
Well,
and
that's true
really,
too.
really holding on to just waiting to see how things click because we really don't know. It's fascinating how it can seem like something is so far off, and then it's just this, you sleep right the one night and something gets integrated while you sleep, and
Well, since you mentioned that, that was the thought I had the other night when I woke up from that dream, and all
yeah,
of that stuff, the mind was saying all of these things, talking about what that dream was indicating.
yeah,
And I had said something to myself some months back when I realized that there was a good reason to begin to revisit Fetter 2.
mm,
And I realized as well that I can't make it happen. I mean, I
yeah,
can go back and revisit it and dig into that stuff again, but it's going to happen the way that it happens. But I thought, you know what? I'm just going to request from myself, from the mind brain system, to let us in on the secret. What else is lurking here in Fetter 2? Now, there's always more.
of
It's
course,
not it's
yeah,
not it's not something where we reach a place of finality with it, but we can also, I think, could be wrong, reach a place where we get a lot of the most important heavy stuff that's really getting in our way.
mm,
And so I did just that. I did it a couple times over a period of several weeks of, hey, just let this be seen.
yeah,
Tell me what this is. Let me know what this is that is a sticking point here. And did it in a very light, easy way, but also in a very, very serious and direct way. It's like, hey, this is important.
yeah,
And there it was. I woke up from that dream the other night, and that was the first thing that once I heard all of that stuff, and I wrote it, or wrote it and entered it into the phone. I realized, wow, this thing truly does, this process. Once you get going in earnest and sincerely, it really does. It's its own thing. It unfolds on its own, and you're just riding the wave.
absolutely true, absolutely true.
So yeah, so all that to say is, in a very long-winded way, you're absolutely right about that. So
I love it.
all right,
Yeah,
well, I'm gonna get out of here.
yeah, it was really great seeing you. Happy holidays,
Yeah,
um,
thank you. You
and
too.
I will talk to you soon.
Okay, talk
All
to you after
right,
a bit.
thank you.
All right,
Bye.
bye.